Hey internet friends, in this video I am reading a chapter straight out of my new book, The Deep State Encyclopedia. The book is available to purchase in the link in the description, both in print and digital form. And I don't know how long this video is going to stay up on my channel, given that I'm about to talk about the things that you're not allowed to talk about on YouTube. So if you want to read more, if you want to know more about dangerous information and stories that have been censored off the internet, I have all that and more in my book. I also have my videos backed up on my website, and you can also find me on places like Gab and the other channels who don't censor the same things that YouTube does. So, the whole spiel. I'll just get to it. This is House of Rockefeller. One of the richest and most influential families in American history is the Rockefeller family. John D. Rockefeller Sr., who was born in New York in 1839, built the family fortune. America's first billionaire, John D. was son of William Rockefeller Sr., otherwise known as Devil Bill, an American businessman, lumberman, herbalist, salesman, snake oil salesman, and con artist. Devil Bill first worked as a lumberjack before becoming a traveling salesman selling elixirs and posing as a botanic physician under the pseudonym Dr. William Livingston. His son, John D., started out in the oil business as a bookkeeper and later as a partner in a refinery company. He established the Standard Oil Company in 1870, and it grew to be one of the biggest and most successful oil companies in the whole world. The ruthless business practices of John D. Rockefeller Sr. included monopolizing the oil industry, undercutting rivals, and buying off politicians and government officials. The son of John D. Rockefeller Sr., John D. Rockefeller Jr., carried on his father's financial legacy as he was involved in a number of commercial and charitable endeavors, such as the construction of New York City's Rockefeller Center and the founding of the Rockefeller Foundation. Nelson Rockefeller, who served as Vice President of the United States under President Gerald Ford and as Governor of New York, is another notable member of the Rockefeller family. And then, of course, we arrive at American banker David Rockefeller, who held the positions of Chairman and CEO of the Chase Manhattan Corporation. David here was the longest living grandchild of John D. Rockefeller and served as Chairman of the Chase Manhattan Bank and founder of the Trilateral Commission, which is very similar to the Bilderberg Group, just a different flavor. The wealth and power of the Rockefeller family has also been the subject of debate and scandal. Government investigations and antitrust lawsuits focused on the family's business practices, particularly those of John D. Rockefeller Sr. And as a result, the Standard Oil Company was split up in 1911 by the U.S. Supreme Court after it was determined that it had engaged in monopolistic practices. With its official narrative of promoting greater collaboration and understanding between Western Europe, North America, and Japan, Deep State agent David Rockefeller co-founded the Trilateral Commission in 1973. True to the globalist mindset, David Rockefeller believed increased cooperation between these territories was essential for fostering stability and tackling global issues. So the Trilateral Commission is not a government organization on paper. Its members are not elected, they're chosen. And basically, the Trilateral Commission, which contains former and present government officials, business executives, and intellectual luminaries from all over the world as members, serves as a shadowy cabal working behind the scenes to influence events and forward its own agenda. Prompted by Ida Tarbell's expose of the Rockefeller oil monopoly, the Rockefellers decided to enhance their public relations to boost their reputation. So John D. Sr. and John D. Jr. and Frederick Taylor Gates founded the Rockefeller Foundation on May 14, 1913. 1913 was a crazy year. Birth of the ADL, Federal Reserve, Rockefeller Foundation. The Rockefeller Foundation has historically provided more than $14 billion to thousands of grantees around the world and directly helped train close to 13,000 Rockefeller Fellows. But this money was used to take over the medical industry, including hospitals, universities, and research centers starting in the first half of the 20th century. You see, the Rockefeller family supported drug-based research by sponsoring it and giving money to colleges and medical schools. Through their International Education Board, they further expanded this policy to foreign medical institutions and universities, where the research involved the use of drugs. On the flip side, non-drug-based institutions and research were denied financing and were abandoned in favor of the lucrative pharmaceutical sector. Because natural remedies and healthy people don't make any money. It's not a good business model. The 1910 Flexner Report to the U.S. Congress quickly criminalized the Foundation's rivals. A post-Civil War United States gave rise to the titans of industry's glory days. The robber barons filled their bags during this era at the expense of the common people. In 1892, a big labor dispute happened at the Carnegie Steel Company plant in Homestead, Pennsylvania, known as the Carnegie Steel Company Homestead Strike. At the time, Andrew Carnegie was one of the wealthiest people in the country, and the Carnegie Steel Company was one of the biggest and most profitable steel companies in the world. The workers at the Homestead plant wanted to negotiate a new contract with the company that would give them better pay and working conditions. These factories were dangerous. Workers labored under abysmal conditions for little pay. But instead of negotiating with the workers like a decent person, Carnegie hired the Pinkerton Detective Agency to quell the unrest, leading to a violent battle between the Pinkertons and the strikers. The situation resulted in deaths of men, women, and children at the hands of the Pinkertons. And eventually, the National Guard was called in to intervene. Much like the Carnegies, the Rockefellers had a similar peasant revolt in which they hired private security to settle the unrest, resulting in the death of innocents. The Ludlow Massacre happened in 1914 in the town of Ludlow, Colorado. It was a fight between coal miners on strike and the Colorado National Guard. Miners went on strike against coal mining companies, including those owned by the Rockefeller family, to get better working conditions, fair wages, and recognition of their union. When the National Guard was called in to keep order, they started shooting at the striking miners and their families, who were living in the tents in the nearby colony. Dozens of people, including women and children, died because of the fight. It was a turning point in the history of labor relations in the United States. Much like with the Homestead Strike, the Ludlow Massacre made people all over the country aware of how bad the industrialists were to their workers, painting families like the Rockefellers and the Carnegies in an incredibly negative light. But why should those who see themselves as gods among men have to deal with the criticism of the common people, the poor workers who were so far below them? The Rockefellers and the Carnegies set aside their differences and came together to fund a new initiative. In 1904, the Carnegie Institution set up a lab complex at Cold Spring Harbor on Long Island, New York. Researchers carefully planned the removal of families, bloodlines, and entire groups of people by collecting millions of index cards about ordinary Americans. Edwin Black wrote for the San Francisco Chronicle in 2003, quote, "From Cold Spring Harbor, eugenics advocates agitated the legislature of America, as well as the nation's social service agencies and associations," end quote. The Salem Daily Capital Journal ran an article on November 4, 1915 entitled Rockefeller Jr. on Eugenic Problems, which detailed a play commissioned by the Rockefellers called The Unborn, which pushed a eugenics agenda. For the first time in dramatic history, the perplexing problem of limitation of undesirable offspring, which has been engaging the attention of thoughtful eugenicists and sociologists the world over, is dealt with on the stage in a play that we are to produce. The right of the child to be well born and the right of the wife to decide about it are problems the solution of which society can no longer ignore." End quote. Notice Rockefeller Jr. uses the terms undesirable and well-born. And as a side note, thank you so much TruthStream Media for having these articles on your website and making them accessible to us when they can no longer be found on the internet. Without TruthStream's research, a lot of this stuff on Rockefeller would have been forgotten. A few months later, on September 3rd, 1915, the Rockefellers once again made headlines for their extracurricular eugenics activities, this time in the Washington Herald, in an article entitled 15 Million Americans Defective, they say, with the subheader reading, "Gigantic Eugenic Enterprise Organized for Sterilization of Unfit of Nation." The Washington Herald article discusses the collaboration between John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, Andrew Graham Bell, the inventor of the telephone, and the wife of the railroad baron E.H. Harriman. The The article discusses that since 1911, the eugenicists were funding a gigantic eugenic enterprise to ascertain what is the matter with the human race. The article ends with, quote, "The organization, after his 4 years' work in this country and Europe, reached the conclusion that sterilization of defectives was the greatest work for them. Statistics gathered reveal the amazing fact that 10% of the present population of the United States are defectives, who must be blotted out as reproducers of human life," end quote. It should be noted that the Rockefellers had a close relationship with Margaret Sanger, a proponent of eugenics in the US, who had a significant impact on Western legislation and practice regarding contraception, sex education, abortion, and the development of eugenics in the 20th century. So just to wrap it all up here, the most powerful and wealthiest families in America conspired together after the Civil War to derail our nation's monetary system by creating the Federal Reserve at Jekyll Island in 1913, and by funding the practice of eugenics all over the world in an effort to kill the poor in huge numbers. The Rockefellers were at the heart of this effort, and while they were funding the push to destabilize the United States and kill off undesirables, they were simultaneously pioneering the medical industry, resulting in the profit-driven system we know today, which doesn't benefit from a healthy individual, only individuals who constantly require pharmaceuticals. Rockefeller observed that there were numerous medical specialties and therapeutic approaches available at the turn of the century, including chiropractic, naturopathy, homeopathy, holistic therapy, herbal medicine, and more. So Rockefeller hired Abraham Flexner to present a report to Congress in 1910 to discredit rivals of Western medicine, who then recommended drugs and radiation as treatments. This research concluded that America had an excess of medical professionals and medical colleges, and that all forms of natural medicine that had been practiced for hundreds or even thousands of years were unreliable quackery. It demanded that medical education be standardized and that only the American Medical Association be permitted to license medical schools in the US. The result was the establishment of the biomedical model as the gold standard of medical training. Thus, the Rockefeller Foundation and Rockefeller Medicine became the face of Western medicine. Through their philanthropy, I'm doing air quotes when I say philanthropy, and funding of medical research, the Rockefeller family has made a significant contribution to the development of modern medicine, for better or for worse. The founding of the first school of public health at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland, was one of the most significant contributions made by the Rockefeller Foundation. This institution, which opened its doors in 1916, was the first of its kind in the country. Much of the vaccine development was at the hands of the Rockefeller Foundation. Eugenics was rebranded after World War II to get rid of its links to Germany and Hitler. Instead, it evolved into population control, or Planned Parenthood's family planning and abortion, and even global warming or climate change, leading to arguments about reducing the burden of overpopulation on the Earth. In its annual report for 1968, the Rockefeller Foundation said that it had helped fund the development of so-called anti-fertility vaccines, as well as their widespread use. The Rockefeller Foundation claimed it was important to learn about the possibility of using vaccines to reduce male fertility. In that poverty, we hate the poor people, lack of education, we hate the uneducated, and lack of work, we hate the lazy people, are made worse by unchecked birth rates among the poor, both in suburban slums and in poor rural areas. So an anti-fertility vaccine needed to be created to combat these issues, since 5 million women were living in poverty in the United States at the time of publication. Don't you just love their whole problem-reaction solution? 20 years later, in 1988, the Rockefeller Foundation released an update on their anti-fertility vaccine development. That year, the National Institute of Immunology in India had finished the first phase of testing with 3 versions of a vaccine for women that would stop them from getting pregnant. The trials, which were paid for by the Indian government and the Rockefeller Foundation, found that each of the vaccines tested could protect against pregnancy for at least 1 year, based on the levels of antibodies that were made in response to the vaccination schedule. But like with all vaccines, there needed to be studies on the effects of the vaccination on an individual throughout their lifetime to measure if the vaccines were really safe and effective. And there were and are no studies to support their safety over a lifetime. In its 1985 annual report, the Rockefeller Foundation showed that it was still working hard to make sure undesirables couldn't reproduce. And they were researching Gossipol, or C30H3008, a substance that prevents fertility. Early on in the Foundation's research, Gossipol, a toxic polyphenol made from the cotton plant, was found to be a good sterilant. Who knew? The next natural question was how to put the poisonous substance into the crops, so unsuspecting people would eat it and therefore they wouldn't reproduce. By the end of 1985, the foundation had given out grants worth about $1.6 million to support and encourage scientific research into the safety and effectiveness of this substance. Throughout the 1990s, the Rockefellers continued their anti-fertility research. However, the foundation became very hush-hush about their doings in the face of widespread criticism. And that's the end of the chapter on the Rockefellers, but the book goes into further detail about the Rockefellers and their involvement in public school education, their involvement in the 1918 Spanish flu, which really wasn't a flu at all. It was more like a pandemic among the vaccinated. The book goes further into Operation Lockstep and its connection with COVID-19 and the Rockefellers. Rockefellers and the Federal Reserve, the creature from Jekyll Island, we got it all covered here in this book. It is very exhaustive, and I hope you can appreciate the effort because, like I said, like with TruthStream, they've been such a wonderful resource for all things Rockefeller on their website and in their videos. They've gone above and beyond in making sure there's archives of Rockefeller articles and things like that. And a big portion of why I wanted to write this book is to document, what we've seen, what we've read, and what we've witnessed, because a big portion of the information that we're left with is online, and the whole flow of information online is being totally erased. Ever since I sat down in 2016 and started writing a journal, keeping notes of everything that I wanted to commit to memory, these families, these events, the hidden history, mystery religions, occultism, hermeticism, everything that these people believe in and what drives them and motivates them, I would write down and I would link sources. And now I go back in those notes as I was writing this whole book. Those sources are gone. These mainstream media sources and quotes and videos, they're all gone. They're gone. Everything has become so censored, and I think we need to put what we know into print. Even though this book contains story after story of evil doings performed in secret and against the American people in much of the world, I'll tell you person to person that I'm a realist, but at my core, I'm an optimist. I believe that through educating the masses and encouraging awareness of these issues, we can once again reclaim our freedom and declare victory over the cabal.